The next bill on today's agenda is House File 1082, Chair Moeller's bill. Chair Moeller, would you like to move that House File 1082 be re-referred to Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee?
That is my motion. Thank you.
I see you have someone beside you to co-present the bill. This is in my script, so apparently we need to announce
I'll let you
this
know when it's
officially. Okay, fabulous. Great, your bill is before us. I see that you have a DE2 amendment. Would you like to move the DE2 amendment to get the bill in the shape that you are presenting today?
That's my motion.
Great, and we do have an A1 amendment to the DE2 amendment. Chair Novotny, I believe this is yours. Okay, so we will disregard the amendment to the DE2. And so back to the DE, or did we just move the DE2? Or is there any discussion to the DE2 amendment? Seeing no discussion, Chair Moeller moves that the DE2 amendment, moves the DE2 amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The DE2 amendment is adopted. Chair Moeller, please tell us about your bill as amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. So this is the Crime Victim Services funding bill. We have been funding crime victim services at the state level, but a lot of their money comes from federal dollars and a lot of it flows through the state. It's been really unstable in recent years, that federal funding, really unstable. And in 2023, we were under the impression that maybe that federal funding would ramp up again. We did fill in some gaps with state funding, and it just doesn't look like that is going to stabilize anytime soon, and they're facing additional pressures as well. So we really are at a crisis moment right now with victim services funding. Victim services funding is really important for domestic violence advocates and domestic violence shelters, sexual assault advocates, general crime advocates, child abuse centers, really any type of crime that impacts a person have access to victim services. There's a 24-hour hotline. It's just really crucial, not only to the victims and survivors who get served, but to public safety in Minnesota. And so one of the things that we are looking at, understanding really what the budget situation is like this year, is trying to create an alternative special revenue account that is going to be dedicated to victim services funding, that different sources of revenue can be placed under. And so the DE amendment that we just adopted creates that account. I think it is a starting place, and we are certainly open for more suggestions of what kinds of revenue could be placed in that account. And I would like to turn it over to Chair Rarick, who we've been working together on this and other issues for years. We did not plan to color coordinate today, but it just happened. And so I'd like to turn it over to her as well to make some comments.
Thank you, Chair Moeller. Yeah. Just a happy situation here. We both wore the same color. So we have been working on this for quite some time, and if you could have heard our conversation in the retiring room, you would have been laughing your just head off, because we were trying to come up with different revenue sources so that we have more stability. And really that's what this is. It's a bill trying to create some stability for victims who are in their absolute lowest moment of their lives. They have been, well, you know that if a victim of domestic violence leaves, that's the most dangerous time for her. The only other time that's slightly more dangerous is when she's pregnant, unfortunately. So this is kind of a last-ditch effort to try to save some of this money, because we don't know what's happening at the federal level. It's been up and down all over the place. So this is sort of an effort of the whole, both sides of the aisle, trying to come together to actually come up with some ideas of how we can take care of the most vulnerable in our communities and our society.
Thank you, Chair Moeller and Chair Rarick. I believe you have a couple of testifiers who are here today. And the first testifier on my list is Sarah Reynolds. Please state your name and your title for the record, and then you can begin.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Sarah Reynolds, and I am the Executive Director of Child's Place, a children's advocacy center located in Redwood Falls. We serve 6 counties in southwest Minnesota, as well as the Lower Sioux Indian community. Our dedicated team consists of just 3 individuals, 1 forensic interviewer, 1 child advocate, and myself. Last year alone, Child's Place provided services to 109 children. Children's advocacy centers play a vital role in supporting victims by uniting teams of professionals to respond quickly and effectively to child abuse. Through forensic interviews conducted by trained experts, we ensure that children's voices are heard clearly and respectfully, using proven techniques that help them share their experiences in a safe and neutral location. This process not only protects the child, but also provides crucial testimony for investigations, bringing justice and healing while prioritizing their well-being. Whether it's offering comfort in a courtroom while a child testifies, assisting grandparents in creating a safe place for children placed in their care, or helping a child obtain medical services after being branded by their abuser, we stand by children and families during their most traumatic moments. Our services empower children, offering them a lifeline of dignity, security, and hope. A staggering 85% of our budget relies on grants from the Office of Justice Programs through state and federal funds. Any reduction in this funding would force us to close our doors, halting services to children in our rural communities. Crime victim service agencies are stuck in the uncertainty of not knowing how long they'll be able to continue to operate. This uncertainty overflows onto our partners in law enforcement and child protection. The loss of our services has a detrimental impact on the way the teams respond to child abuse. However, the most heartbreaking part of this uncertainty is when caregivers ask me, "Will you be with us when we go to court next year?" And I have to say, I don't know. The thought of these children and families navigating the court system alone is unbearable. As someone deeply committed to supporting victims of crime, I urge you to recognize the critical need for continued funding for crime victim service programs. By supporting these programs, you are not only investing in the well-being of our children, but you are assuring the safety of our communities. Please support House File 1082. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you so much. Our next testifier who is on the list is Tammy McConkey. And Tammy, when you come up, please state your name and your title for the record, and then you can begin.
Hello, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Tammy McConkey. I'm an attorney, and I work in the Ramsey County Attorney's Office. One of the things that I do there is that I'm the director of our Crime Victim Services Program. And so we are a program of 13 victim witness advocates who are working alongside the prosecutors. And our main goal of our advocates is to make sure that the victims' rights are realized, that they get under Minnesota Statute 611A. So, currently, the Office of Justice Programs funds 2 of our advocate positions, and right now, each of our advocates is carrying a caseload of about 230 cases. And that, to put it in context, an ideal number would be about 100 to 150, and we've been at 230 for some time. Just in the last quarter of 2024, our advocates served over 2,000 crime victims. We gave notice of hearings over 10,000 times during that time period, and we gave information about the criminal justice process, victims' rights, answered their questions about 5,000 times during that process. These are the things that we do because we're required under the statute. But there are other things that we should do to help make the process more bearable and less painful for victims, like we would really like to accompany victims to court hearings when they go to court. We would like to be able to find wheelchairs for them, to find places for them to park, or help them get rides to court. And if we were to lose funding, these are things that we may not be able to continue to do. We also try to take a very holistic approach to serving victims because we understand that this is what helps them to heal from what happened to them, and to also help them regain their strength to return to being participating and cooperative members of our community. So in order to take that holistic approach, we really need to work alongside community-based advocates like domestic violence advocates, sexual assault advocates, because their work starts before our prosecution and often runs long after it. And so working together, that gives victims the best of both worlds. Our advocates reach out to community-based advocates to do things like help domestic violence victims find a new place to live if they need to. It helps them find shelter if they need it, food resources, support groups, crisis intervention, civil attorneys that will help them with different matters, and all variety of different resources. So if they were to lose funding, the ability that both types of agencies would have to provide the best possible experience for victims who are going through a terrible time, going through the court system, would be really impacted. So I urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have two members of the public who signed up to testify on House File 1082. And the first person is Andrew Morris. And on deck is Sally Meany. And Sally, once Andrew's finished, you can head right up. Andrew, please state your name and your title for the record, and you can begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Andrew Morris, and I serve as the Public Affairs and Legislative Liaison at the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. I'm here today to express the Council's support for House File 1082 offered by Chair Muller. Specifically, preventing and addressing gender-based domestic and sexual violence has been a long-standing priority for the Council. As part of its work to address this issue, the Council has long encouraged the state to support a holistic approach through various state agencies to address and ideally prevent these crimes from occurring. This history included spearheading a pilot program to prevent domestic violence and sexual assault prevention that was administered by the Minnesota Department of Health. Since the conclusion of that program in 2022, the Council has continued to work with stakeholders, including the Office of Justice Programs, to continue this work. The Council has supported this initiative from the Office of Justice Programs in the past and is proud to do so again today. We are particularly encouraged that this legislation, in addition to providing crucial further resources, prioritizes programs that serve culturally specific and other underserved communities, which are critical to effectively reaching survivors for whom traditional outreach may not be accessible. We strongly encourage the committee to support this bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Sally Meany. You can introduce yourself when you get up there and get going.
Hi, I'm Sally Maney. I'm a lifelong Minnesota resident. If this committee is looking for funds to support victim services, I have found the funds. It is sitting in prison. 2 years ago, the Minnesota legislation passed the Humane MRRA law. Thank you for your successful efforts to make Minnesota safer while relocating taxpayers' funds. Inmates that actively pursue rehabilitation and model great behavior gain the right to a 17% reduction of days of incarceration. At $176 per diem, one qualified inmate released is a yearly savings of $64,000. Out of 10,000 inmates, there are surely 1,000 who qualify right now, which equals $64 million. Out of 50% of this money goes to the Office of Justice Programs, which includes victim services. So where is your $32 million? the Department of Corrections was given 18 months, January 1, 2025, to implement pilot programs and policy decisions. Now they have pushed the date out further to September 2025. This will result in $0 for promised programs in fiscal year 2026. Perhaps the new Committee on Fraud, Waste, and Abuse should review this situation. No more delays. Fund these great programs now. Thank you for your time. And I have there's a handout that goes with this about more details about how this program is supposed to be funding all of these other programs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we will turn to member discussion. Any members have comments? Yes, Representative Hudson, sorry, I was like, are you raising your hand?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Boy, did I pick the wrong seat to be able to actually be able to turn and look at you guys. So I have a couple of concerns about this bill. So specifically in lines 117 through 120 of the DE2, which is what I believe we're on, right? Hard to keep track. So services funded must, got that word must, include services for victims of crime in underserved communities most impacted by violence and reflect the ethical, racial, economic, cultural, and geographic diversity of the state. That's one part. And then the second part of up to 10% of the appropriation is available for grant administration. So in terms of how these funds would end up being distributed statewide, how are we perceiving that there might be geographic disparities as a result of this language? And either of you can take it, but I imagine Representative Moeller would want to jump at it.
And Chair Mueller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Hudson. So this is the exact same language that we had in the bill last year as well. I don't, if someone's from OJP is here and wants to speak to how they actually make these determinations, but this is the same language that we have used in past years. And I will say that as we discussed this last year, we talked about the diversity and that some communities do impact crimes more than others, but we did include in here geographic diversity as well, because we want to make sure that victims in every corner of the state are getting the services that they need and that they deserve, quite frankly. So if you have a specific question about how it's actually allocated or decided, I'm happy to see if OJP is here or one of the coalitions could maybe answer that question. Or I don't know if Chair Rarick has thoughts on it.
Chair Rarick?
Thank you. I was actually going to ask some of the fiscal staff if they have some of that. And we do have OJP that's still in the room too, if they want to talk about how they allocate it across the state.
Great. Ms. Babine, you can introduce yourself and then answer the question. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, Kim Babine, I'm Interim Executive Director at the Office of Justice Programs. Madam Chair, Representative, to your question about how this is implemented, the request for proposals that we put out, that is our competitive funding process for these funds, asks the people who are applying for information around where they serve, what communities they serve, and what the community makeup is and how they are reaching those communities. When we talk about those communities most impacted by violence, we're looking at crime data around the state as to where there are there's more violence that may need to be addressed. But one of the as Chair Mueller said, don't lose that geographic diversity, because that is a very high priority for the Office of Justice Programs. It's one of the primary things that we look at, because we want to make sure that people in all areas of the state have access. And it's one of the real issues with cuts to the program, because you can imagine, that if people have to drive far to receive services, that's obviously a detriment. The testifiers comments around the child advocacy centers, I think about them a lot in terms of how far a child might have to go to receive services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Hudson, did you have follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So do you have any data regarding like how that actually breaks down dollar-wise in terms of where the money is going, like perhaps a percentage that is directed to the metro versus outstate?
Yep, I don't have that information in terms of percentage, and also depends on exactly how you look at the metro, of course, but we do have that information, and I believe it's on our website. If it's not, we can, we'll share it with you one way or another, but we do, in the past, we've created maps so that you can see exactly where that distribution is.
And Ms. Babine, we can share that with the committee afterwards, too. Thank you. Representative Mueller?
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to add to that as well. Not every community is going to have a child abuse center. I don't know how many there are in the state, but not every county has one of those. So one county may have it there, but it may serve a larger population of surrounding counties. Or like there's one program where the 24-hour hotline is at. It's located in Hennepin County, but of course Minnesota victims from all over the state can use that hotline. So sometimes it's not exactly an apple-to-apple comparison.
Yep.
Thank you. One more question?
Just one more question. Since I've got you here, it's a great opportunity. So we've got that 10% of the appropriation being used for administrative costs. I had a similar question in Ed Finance that I asked of MDE and wasn't able to get a terribly clear answer. If you don't have to use all of that 10%, what is done with the balance? Does it go towards more grants, or does it come back to us, or how does that work?
Yes, absolutely.
Ms. Babine?
Madam Chair, Representative, that's exactly the case. Or we try to use the least amount possible to ensure good oversight of the grants. We want to make sure that they're administered well, that we are doing all the checks that we need to do. But we also, we want the most money to go to the grants. We don't want it to go to the state, to state staff. We want it to go out to the grants. And so we generally reserve up to 10%, depending on what the option is, up to 2% in some cases. We reserve that, put out the grants, and then depending, in this particular case, we do some work with the, sorry, I'm trying to think of how to say this clearly. Because we have both federal and state funds, we're able to shift some funding so that then we can make sure that all that state funding gets used. So it does go back out in grants, the way that we're able to move the funding around. And that's one of the pieces with the special revenue fund account, that if we had the flexibility for that money that was reserved in the, for administration costs in the special revenue fund, then it would more easily go out in grants, and it wouldn't take such a manual process to make sure those dollars get out.
Thank you. Representative Greenman, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate both of your leadership on this. And I know that in last biennium, we showed a real commitment to this work. I'm wondering if you, either one of you or both of you, have a sense, an estimate of the size of the need, to Representative Hudson's point. Like what is the size of the need if we could support the organizations and the shelters and the services that folks across the state need in our community? What would that look like? Do you have a sense of that?
Chair Mueller?
Thank you. I wish Ms. Babine was still up here. Because I know they can tell you how many at least applied last time. And I think that is a good place to start talking about what the need might look like.
Right, and Ms. Babine, you can stay because I understand there are some more questions for you too from other members. So if you'd like to answer.
Madam Chair, Representative, so the amount of the need, that is a great question, and we, just like Chair Mueller was saying, we are using the amount that was requested in the last competitive process as our starting point. So in the last competitive process, we were putting out funds for one-year grants. We ended up amending them and adding more funds to them later, but we put out, we had We had $62 million available in funding, and we had $100 million in requests. And so that 100 million, I think it was 101 million in requests. A couple of things to keep in mind. That was in 2023, and so costs have obviously risen since then. The need, the coalitions can speak to the need as well, and the increases there. The other piece is we know that not all the people in the state doing the work applied. We had limited ability to really get the word out about, hey, here's this competitive funding process. And so that's something that OJP is really committed to make sure that we are identifying organizations across the state who are doing this work so that they know that the funding opportunity is available. So I would say $100 million a year is a starting point, but it's not reflective of the entire need.
Right. Representative Greenman?
Thank you. And so I hear you saying that's probably a floor, just as we're thinking about it. And do you have a sense, and I know everything's in flux, including the appropriations that we did in the last biennium are one time, and so I appreciate the idea of that both of you, and I think I heard sort of finding a long-term and sustainable funding source, because obviously this need is not year to year. Do you have a sense of if we lose the federal funding, how much of a hole that will be in that $100 million?
Ms. Babine?
And I have that right here. So the hole left if we don't receive the federal funding. Yes, so we receive, apparently I'm gonna do this from memory. Okay, so we receive, there's about $30 million a year in state funding that we receive. The federal funding that's stable that we generally receive year to year, and again, I'm rounding from memory here. So the stable funding that we receive year to year is from three different pots, and that equals about $6 million a year. The unstable funding source that the Chair Mueller was referring to is the Federal Victims of Crime Act funds. And that's where we received about $12.5 million last year. In the past, that's been high as $50 million. And that is where this crisis is. So if we do not have those funds, we will absolutely have to make cuts for the grants that start 10/1/25. If we are able to get those federal funds in, then there is a chance that we can it will probably still be a slight cut or about stable funding for the next grant year, but it would be only one more year of close to steady funding.
Ms. Babine, I didn't quite catch for the stable funding, did you say 6 million or 60 million? It's very different, so I feel like I should know.
And I rounded incorrectly, it's a little higher than that, but there's 1.5 in VAWA, 1.8 in SASP, the Sexual Assault Services Program, and 4.5 in Family Violence Prevention and Services Act funding.
Great. Thank you so much. Representative Greenman, did you have any follow-up? No?
I just want to, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you. I think in lots of our committee areas, we're talking about how do we continue to fund and find stable funding for the services and the supports that our communities need. This is an important one. We obviously, as a state, are not going to be able to make up the full whole of the federal government, and it sounds like we're making up some of the instability, even if that federal funding continues. So I really appreciate your work, and I'm proud to support this bill.
Thanks. Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this bill. I do support it. I have a question, though. Just need some clarity on something. So I believe you cited the special revenue account, Miss, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Babine.
Babine. So in 2018, I do believe that there was an increase on the federal funding side through the Trump administration. And then in 2020, through the Biden administration, there were some funding cuts to VOCA. And you had cited earlier to Representative Hudson's question of the O&M costs, that up to 10%, that kind of fluctuates based off of the funding that is appropriated on the federal side of things, and how that might either necessitate you guys to take more funding on the O&M costs or reduce those costs. Could you touch on that a little bit more? Is that something that you guys do often, if there's an increase or a decrease in those cuts federally, regardless of the administration, on how that impacts the O&M from the OJP side of things?
Ms. Babine?
Madam Chair, Representative, forgive me if I'm wrong, the O&M, what does that mean?
Representative Engen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The oversight and management costs.
Thank you.
Ms. Babine?
Operations and maintenance, thank you. I just haven't called it that, so thank you. So depending on so you're asking, depending on the ups and downs in the federal funding, how much admin do we take out of the state? Generally, I don't have an exact answer for that, but the amount of admin costs that we would take on the state funds would be relative to the state funds. We wouldn't use state funds to administer the federal funds. We do get a portion of those federal awards that we're able to use for administration. So we wouldn't use state funds to subsidize the work that needs to be done from the federal awards, if that makes sense. I guess I might not be understanding you. So if the federal awards go up and down, then we take the grant administration costs based on that amount.
Representative Engen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if there's more coming in from the federal side, would that allow you guys to take less on the state side for the O&M costs, or of that 10% that you guys are eligible to retain for grant administration?
Ms. Babine?
Madam Chair, Representative, again, we don't want one to subsidize the other. We want the state operation, did you say operations and maintenance?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Okay, thank you. Those funds to be used for staff to work on the state grants, and the federal funds to be supporting that. So perhaps there's a chance that it might decrease the need for those state grant dollars, but I would say there's not a clear correlation because we correlate it to the funding source.
Representative Engen, any follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we can talk offline too. I just wanted to understand that a little bit more clearly, but thank you for the information.
Thanks. And Co-Chair Novotny?
Thank you, Vice Chair Feist, and I forget your title. What's your title there?
I'm Interim Executive Director, Madam Chair.
Executive Director Babine. So we don't have the money coming in from MRRA.
Chair Novotny, do you mind putting the mic just a little bit
We don't have the
closer?
money coming in from MRRA that we were planning on, and how are we making up that funding? How much were we planning on getting, and how are we making that up as far as funding these programs?
It looks like Chair Mueller has input.
Yep, thank you. So the MRRA funding, there was no fiscal note with that bill in past years. And it's not, I think another testifier mentioned this as well. They are in a pilot right now, and it will be rolled out, but it hasn't been implemented yet, and so there is no money, so to speak, in a pot, and there's no projection of money. I mean, ultimately, what our goal would be is to put those savings into the special revenue account as well. But at this point, we don't have an estimate from that, and I don't know if fiscal staff wants to add more, but there was no number that was associated with that in past years.
Mr. Walls or Diebel? Mr. Walls?
Madam Chair and members, as of yet, the department has never fiscal noted because they did not know. They just said that they couldn't anticipate how many people would be given early release until the program was up and running and had some experience.
Chair Novotny?
Another question for the interim executive director. Ms. Babine, you talked about how you take into consideration the pre-existing language from the past bill. It's going to be the same as that's in this bill, talking about underserved communities impacted by violence, reflecting ethnic, racial, economic, cultural, and geographic diversity in the state. How much of the grant process takes that sentence into the amount of grants that are given.
Ms. Babine?
Madam Chair, Chair Novotny, you asked the amount of the grant process that takes that, or the grants that are put out. Is that what you said?
Chair Novotny?
Thank you, Vice Chair
Oh, the
Feiss.
effort?
How much weight is put on that sentence in one of the grant requests?
Yep.
Based on what they request as opposed to what you actually award in a grant?
Ms. Babine?
Madam Chair, Chair Novotny, that is a great question. As I reflect on our last RFP, that information, particularly around the ethnic, racial, economic, cultural diversity of the state, is a question that's asked on the application in terms of who are the individuals or victims in your area that you are looking to serve, and what is your ability and what is your ability to serve them, and what do you bring to those services? So I don't have an exact percentage, but that is one of many questions about the work that an organization is doing, the type of work, the type of services, and how they accomplish those services.
Chair Novotny?
Thank you, Vice Chair Feiss. Well, I asked that because in looking at the way that the funds are distributed in the current grant program, when we're doing some dieting, and I have to say it's pretty hard to look at the OJP grant site and really get a focus on how much money is going to which areas for what services. It's pretty convoluted. I can see where some of the information on the grantees are not even in the right counties, and you can't tell some of these organizations that are providing these vital services that I also absolutely support, and they might be covering multiple counties, but it's, if you look on your website, it'll just say one county. And I'll give you an example. I looked at my area that is served by a group called Rivers of Hope. Rivers of Hope is actually based in Monticello, and it covers Sherburne and Wright County. If you look on the OJP website, the grant puts it against Sherburne County, and then the grant, if you work it out, if you combine the populations of Sherburne and Wright County, it ends up being about $1.50 a person for the population. On the other end of the spectrum, you can look at the Prairie Island community, which receives approximately $437 per person. So I'll contrast that. The rest of Goodhue County, which would also, cover parts of the Prairie Island community, gets approximately $21 per person. So I'm really confused, or obviously the geographic diversity plays a really big deal. You must put a lot of weight into that to have these great disparities. For those of us that worked in criminal justice system, we have the lawyers on the other side, we have the law enforcement personnel on this side. We all have concerns. It's one of the major calls that we go on. It's one of the most volatile calls that we go on in the last 2 years. We've lost 4 law enforcement officers on domestic calls as it is. And but it's not a call that any of us we're still working would shy away from. We run to that call. We just want to make sure that a victim in Southwest Minnesota gets the same service that someone in a different part of the state gets. I feel personally that a domestic abuse victim is equal. There are obviously some areas of the state where their crime overall might take a little bit of consideration into how many services are needed, but in all the times that at 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm dealing with a domestic abuse victim and I called my Rivers of Hope people because I knew that we needed to get that victim in touch with an advocate, not once did they ever ask, where are you from, other than how are you going to contact them. They need to get these services. I was shocked when I ran these numbers and looked at the website at the disparities in funding. I don't know how we address that. I'll address that in closing on some of the things we'd like to do. But I'd really like to know, and if you have it, what your formula was that you used to come up with these great disparities in fundings based on different areas, based on this one sentence of the bill when you get a chance.
Didn't sound like there was an immediate question there, but a request. So is there any other member discussion? Did you have more, you said something about in closing. Did you have more
Are we
that
at
you
that
wanted?
point?
Yeah, that was it.
Well, in that case,
Yeah, Chair-
as
Co-Chair
I've been
Rodney.
working with Chair Moeller on this, and I hope we continue to move this bill forward, given the time constraints that we are under, there had been discussion, do we hold this bill here in this committee until some of these issues are addressed, or do we move it to Judiciary? Chair Moeller, speaking with the staff up here, we don't have a fiscal note yet, and it'll go to, if we go to Judiciary, because we are running up against the dates, can we have this come back to this committee and we can discuss this more? Because I'd really like to know how we're going to address this. I really appreciate the funding sources that you have identified as possible ways of getting at the coming up with a solid, reliable funding source, but those are down the road. We need to come up with a way of funding this in the meantime. So the money's got to be there. The cuts have come. Looking at some of the research since 2018, when we were at peak funding, we're well under half of that now. And looking at the governor's proposal, the governor's budget cuts us by at least half, about half. So we have to figure out something that's sustainable and equitable. Thank you.
And Chair Mueller, did you want to respond to the question about the procedural path for this bill?
I can do my closing at the same time as I respond, if that works. All right. Yeah, so this will have to go to Judiciary because of the marriage license fees that we put on with the DE, but this will absolutely be coming back because this is the Committee of Jurisdiction. I'm happy to work with you. Like you said, we've been having these discussions, and I think we need to dig into the data a little bit more, and I'm glad to do that work together. Also, I just want to make sure people have seen the packets, and I think all the letters are compelling, but I think it's really amazing when you look especially at the letter from the victim coalitions and all of the signatures that are on here, from law enforcement to probation to social workers to healthcare to pastors to other nonprofits from all over the state. So I think there is a general recognition among the community, among the state, and among members of this committee, and certainly in a bipartisan fashion as well, that these victim services are crucial to public safety. And so I look forward to further discussion and hope you can vote yes now to keep the bill moving.
Great, thank you. And Chair Rarick, did you have anything else that you wanted to conclude with?
I'm here just again to visually show you that this is a bipartisan issue. We work together. I know I've had multiple conversations with Chair Novotny and on multiple bills, actually. I just can't leave this committee. So I'm very happy to work with that too and make sure that it is what it needs to be to make sure we have equity across the whole state. I'm very committed to equity across the state. And in fairness, Monticello is my backyard. So that's where Rivers of Hope is. And they should get the funding that they need so they can serve our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you both for being such champions for crime victim services. With that, Chair Mueller renews the motion that House File 1082 as amended be re-referred to the Judiciary Finance and Policy Committee. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion prevails.